Good evening, fellow ghouls, and welcome to Undeth Consumes. I am Undeth, and tonight's back-to-back stories, titled Something Evil Lives in the Ocean and The Chair in the Basement, are terrifying accounts of two young people destined to survive what others unfortunately did not. Please light a candle, sit back and relax as we prepare to begin. I was 15. My family and I were in Fort Myers, Florida, and there was a terrible storm on the horizon riding in on black clouds. The waves had begun crashing like a watery bulldozer, and the sea was becoming choppy. I was boogie boarding, and I went out for one last wave. Something very cold bumped into my legs. Seconds later, I went under. At this moment, I was a boiled crab getting my leg ripped at by a hungry restaurant patron, simultaneously screaming and inhaling copious amounts of salt water. I could feel something of great strength tugging me along as the sand I clawed at began to fall away from my fingertips. Something tangible and icy had wrapped itself around my ankle. That is the moment that I realized amidst the struggling that it wasn't a riptide. Something had a hold of my leg, and it was dragging me further and further from land. When I couldn't hold my breath any longer, my fight-or-flight instincts kicked in. Instead of swimming away from whatever it was, I swam along with it. My head broke above the surface one time, and I ejected the salt water from my lungs and took one more deep breath. Then I was dragged down again. Now facing the horizon, I felt that same snug, icy grip, only now on my forearm, as it continued to pull. I'd assumed I'd been pulled by a giant squid, but then I opened my eyes, and what I saw was nightmarish. I was looking directly into the eyes of a little boy with dark blue lips, a pale bluish tint to his skin, and his jaw hanging open. He was slightly bloated, like the corpse of a drowning victim. His fingers were latched onto my forearms, and his dead, lifeless eyes gazed past the material plane, directly into my soul. This boy was miraculously swimming backwards while simultaneously pulling me to my death. Utterly frightening was the vision of his legs paddling eerily and sluggishly behind him while swimming in the wrong direction. Panicking, I pushed my feet against his chest and propelled myself away and out of his icy, inhuman grip. The last thing I saw was the boy grasping for my legs while receding down into the black abyss, smiling at me with that toothless grin on the way down. I kicked and clawed for the surface when I heard a humming of what sounded like some sort of demonic lullaby after he disappeared, emanating all around me in the echoes, yet strangely not muffled by the water in my ears. Once my head broke the surface and I began taking giant breaths, my eyes adjusted, and I discovered that I was maybe only 100 yards from the shore. I swam as hard and fast as I could, fighting exhaustion. I figured I wouldn't make it, but then my feet touched down on the sandbar, the waves violently crashing around me and thunder rumbling overhead. I took a minute to breathe. My parents were there, and I told them what happened, that it was a boy, a very evil boy who pulled me under. My dad said sometimes in a stressful situation you'll imagine things like that. To this day, he never went against his conviction that I had imagined it, but I saw it in his face the next morning. Pure dread in his eyes when I showed him the freezer burns on my wrists and my ankles in the shape of fingers. Somehow I believe that many of those who have drowned in these undertows were really drowned by something else. They are just not alive to tell us about it. When I was 11, we moved into an old colonial-style farmhouse in Virginia. We left after a year. From the very beginning, strange things happened at night when I'd be asleep. I'd often wake up to my pillows being moved, lying all over me, or even scattered across the floor. I was never awake to see it happen. Whatever was doing it must have known that I was asleep. Additionally, something else would occur which disturbed me deeply, but infuriated my dad. I woke up to go down into the basement one morning and screamed when I saw it. An old wooden folding chair was completely opened up, just sitting against the bottom step. It looked like an invisible person was seated in it, leering up at me as I stood atop the staircase. It was just a chair, but its positioning right at the bottom of those steps overwhelmed me with dread. Eventually, Dad would begin storing it in the incinerator room. One unforgettable night, I was babysitting my little sister while her parents were out. I heard a strange noise coming from underneath us, so I muted the living room TV. I could hear the legs of the wooden chair sluggishly being dragged across the concrete floor, down in the darkness. Immediately, my sister and I ran to our room, screaming, jumping under our covers, cradling each other and shaking. The mere image of that thing crawling across the floor of the cellar in pitch darkness on its own still gives me the chills. I feel pity for whatever fly was on the wall down there to see or hear that. The pillow occurrences started happening to my sister. One night I woke up to Anna making strange noises in her sleep. When I sat up, I watched the pillow tumbling to the floor from her bed and cried out to Mom and Dad. We started sleeping in our parents' room for the last few months, and the nighttime happenings ceased before we eventually moved out. It's been 18 years since, but earlier today my mom called and said in a rather uneasy tone, "Honey, you need to Google our old house." But she didn't tell me why. I never thought to do it, and so when I clicked for the results on that address, I began shaking inside, and my heart began to race. The newspaper clipping reads as follows, paraphrased. December 10th, 1979. Gruesome Jamestown crime scene. Neighbors report a strange smell at 13 Summit Drive. Police discover 7-year-old girl and 8-year-old boy deceased in their beds, and their 29-year-old father, Robert Mast, hanging by a rafter in the basement. Now I know what it was trying to do with those pillows. Thank you for listening. Please, if you like these stories, click like and subscribe, as I will be uploading more scary stories soon. Sleep tight, fellow ghouls, and fear not the darkness. Until next time.